When children have substantial delays, the medical team will often consider genetic testing as part of the evaluation to see if they can identify a specific underlying reason for the challenges the child is experiencing. Since many families have questions about this process and what the results mean, we wanted to offer families a brief introduction to genetic testing. So today we have with us Emily Jordan, a genetic counselor from the Children's Hospital at Erlanger, to help answer some of the questions that families have about genetic testing in general. Emily, thank you so much for your time and expertise and willingness to help demystify this process for our families. And we'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this series. And we do have the disclaimer that this does not replace any medical advice, and to please speak with your healthcare providers. But I did want to give you guys an introduction to genetics, both the testing side of things and if you are referred for a genetics appointment. And I'm a pediatric genetic counselor at the Children's Hospital at Erlanger. So we will take a few moments to talk a little bit about genes and DNA, and then also some of the details about genetic testing and genetic appointments. We'll talk about possible test results that we can get from these tests, and then some things that you want to consider when thinking about genetic testing. So when we're talking about genetics, we are talking about the instructions for how our bodies work and grow. You may already be familiar with DNA or have heard of DNA, but DNA is sort of like a code that is very deep in our cells, and it's very small, but you can see a picture of DNA down here, and it has a code or almost like its own alphabet. And a collection of DNA that codes for one particular protein is a gene. So we tend to think of our DNA in the genes that it codes for. And then DNA is wound up very tightly, ultimately into these packages called chromosomes. And so you may hear about chromosomes as well. And so if you look at a cell underneath the microscope, you're able to see chromosomes with a microscope, but DNA is so tiny we can't really even see it. So when we're doing testing, we could either be testing chromosomes or we could be testing how well the genes are put together or if there are any differences in our genes. So with that, we try to think, what's the goal of genetics, or why do we even want to know this information in the first place? And really it boils down to, can we diagnose the cause of a particular health concern? If we can find the cause of a health concern, then we can hopefully be able to know how to treat it better. So a person with a genetic condition may have issues in more than one part of their body. So knowing if they have a genetic condition may let us know what parts of the body do we need to pay attention to. You know, we may only notice differences in development, but do we also need to be concerned about somebody's heart or their kidneys, other things that specialists need to be on the lookout for? So it can guide us in what sorts of testing we need to be looking out for other healthcare providers. And we also hope to better understand, can we manage this condition in a particular way since we've seen enough people with a genetic condition? We also try to figure out, is this condition inherited or can it be passed down through family members? And if it is, how is it inherited and which are the family members we need to be concerned about? We can also discuss, do other family members need to be tested and what the process of that would be. When we're doing genetic testing, you may have it done through a genetics office or it may be through your other healthcare providers, but generally they're looking for a cause of a particular health concern. So somebody may already have the diagnosis of autism, learning difficulties, or seizures, and so their healthcare provider might offer genetic testing to find the cause of those health conditions. An example of a condition we could test for is one condition at a time, and Fragile X is a test we often do for children with learning difficulties, and that's one test that we would do to test for one particular condition. Whereas other genetic tests are more broad and you're testing for many conditions at once. Examples of that would be a microarray or multiple gene tests or exome testing. And usually we can do genetic testing on a cheek swab, sometimes blood or other types of tests, but for most of the people nowadays can get it done with a cheek swab. If you are referred for a genetics appointment, you might be meeting with a geneticist, which would be a medical doctor, or a genetic counselor. And we would be going through that individual's health history, so asking questions about their health all the way from birth until now, as well as their family history. So if you're preparing for a genetics appointment, you may need to brush up on what are the health conditions in your family and how old people were when they were diagnosed with those. The geneticist would do a physical exam to look over for clues or anything that looks like it might be related to a genetic condition. So they'll take a look at your face, hands, feet, all of the different features looking for clues. And then if genetic testing has already been done, we'll discuss the results of those tests and then discuss any other types of testing that we might be thinking about. Overall, we want to diagnose genetic conditions or discuss medical management for those. And then, of course, thinking about the family more broadly, we want to think about inheritance. So if you're thinking about genetic testing, you might ask yourself, what are the possible types of results I can get from genetic testing? What sort of information can I learn from these? In general, we have usually 3 types of results we can get back from genetic testing. Usually the most informative type of result we get is a positive test result. And that's the situation where we did find a genetic difference. Some might call it a variant. You may have heard the word mutation in the past, but it's a genetic difference that likely explains a health condition. And it's usually the condition that we are testing for in the first place. And the idea is that we could then use that information to know how to manage somebody and then hopefully determine how it's inherited or if it's inherited in the family. On the opposite side of that, there would be a negative test result, meaning that no genetic difference was found in the test that we looked at. If that's the situation, that means we simply have not found the cause of the health condition that we were testing for. The child may still have that health condition, but whatever genetic test we did not identify a cause. So there still could be a genetic cause for that health condition. Maybe it's a different gene we had not yet tested for, or something about another part of the genetics that we don't know about yet. But either way, if we have a negative test, we simply have not diagnosed what the cause of that was. Also, we know that things like environment or other factors can play into our genetics to create health conditions as well. So if we don't have a negative test result, then in the middle here is something that we call an uncertain test result. And that happens when a genetic test detects a difference, but we're unsure if that genetic difference is enough to explain any sort of health condition. Simply put, we all have differences in our DNA because we are all unique people, and we have differences in our DNA from one another. And the laboratories figure out, do these genetic differences impact a person enough to cause a genetic syndrome, or are they just normal findings? So if we get an uncertain test result, simply more information is needed. We hope that with time and new genetic discoveries, we'll figure out what those test results mean. But for the moment, an uncertain result does not diagnose a genetic condition. So when you get your test results, you may often have questions, and hopefully your healthcare providers or genetics team can help explain those. But some things to keep in mind is that other family members may need to be tested. Those family members may be tested after we get the test results back. For example, if we get positive test results, we may want to look for that condition in other family members. Oftentimes, family members can provide genetic samples when testing is ordered. For example, with an exome test, parents may give a DNA sample along with their child to help us tease apart a genetic cause. We also tell people in general it's a good idea to keep a copy of a genetic test for your own records in healthcare, but also if you ever need to share that information with a family member or someone else. And then we also know that genetic information changes over time. So we are still learning, and there may be new information that we find out about genes and genetic causes of health concerns. So you may want to, in the future, continue to ask your healthcare provider if there's other tests or other information that needs to be considered over the years. So if you're thinking about genetic testing, some things to consider is that there have been recent developments and advances with genetic services that make these more available to people than we've had in the past. They've generally become more affordable than they have in previous years. And so if you're still figuring out if genetic testing is for you, you can speak with a genetic counselor to help figure out, think through some of those details about testing. Genetic test records are private as part of anybody's medical record. And so that information is your own and kept as part of your record, but somebody may choose to share that information with family members or to help get resources. And a good example of that is somebody who has a child with a genetic condition may share that information with the school system to help get resources for their child. We also want you to know there's a law protecting against genetic discrimination, and that law is called the Genetic Information Nondiscrimination Act, or GINA for short. That law protects against loss of job or health insurance based on genetic information. Now, there are some exceptions in this law, but there are some protections in place. And if you would like to learn more about those protections, you can visit that link below or search GINA. Thank you so much for taking this time to learn more about genetics. And if you do have further questions, you can go to nsgc.org and find a genetic counselor near you. There's also some great resources through the CDC that can help explain some more details about genetic testing. Thank you.